The Boeing B-29 was conceived in peace and born of war. Between 1942 and 1946, nearly 4,000 of the revolutionary bombers rolled off production lines in the United States. A remarkable achievement, considering that the B-29, the most advanced aircraft of its day, existed only on paper as late as 1941. Dwarfing its largest contemporaries, it was a plane that lent itself to superlatives. Dubbed the Super Fortress, it took a super effort to design, build, and fly in a time to affect the war's outcome. Almost from the beginning, the B-29 was destined for a single role: to end the war in the Pacific. In fulfilling that role, the mighty aircraft changed the course of world history. Today, approximately 20 B-29s survive. Only one still flies. She is FiFi, the pride and joy of the Confederate Air Force. Each summer, FiFi and her crew of CAF volunteers tour the country, moving from town to town like airborne gypsies. Their mission? To keep alive the spirit of a bygone era, to remind people of a time when freedom hung in the balance, when Americans pulled together for a common cause and emerged victorious.
We hear the most wonderful stories. Every city we go to, there's at least one, and usually more, really heartwarming stories that come out when people come to see the airplanes.
I'll never forget as long as I live. He sat down and he had his hands above the wheel, and he was just, his eyes were scanning the instrument clock. I stopped talking because I could see the thought cloud above the man's head.
So you couldn't really classify it as fun, but it's very rewarding and satisfying.
Well, that's where you can look inside the airplane.
Working long hours in the sun and wind, the spirit and dedication of the CAF members who maintain and fly FiFi mirrors that of the people who brought the B-29 into service so long ago. They take their mission to keep her flying just as seriously as the men and women of the 1940s approached winning the war.
The airplane, the B-29 here, is the last one flying. We consider these airplanes to be a national treasure. We feel an obligation to preserve them for future generations. Thank you. You guys enjoy yourself. If you guys want to take a flight deck tour, take care of that right at the aircraft.
In 1957, a group of Texas aviators began collecting one of every U.S. aircraft that flew in World War II.
They tell you all about the aircraft, its capabilities, the different positions, answer all your questions. It's quite in-depth, and you'll really enjoy it.
They called their group the Confederate Air Force, themselves colonels, and their collection the Ghost Squadron. Each year, the planes of the Ghost Squadron fan out across the nation on summer tours, just as extensive as any rock band might undertake. Between May and October, FiFi, the world's only flying B-29, her companion, the B-24 Liberator named Diamond Lil, and their crews stop in as many as 25 to 30 cities. They display the aircraft on the ground and in the air, always attending to their two mission objectives.
One is to help keep these two rare airplanes airworthy, and the other is to try to keep alive to as many people as we can what this nation did. And it's not just the people who went out in the military and flew the planes, but it includes the people who designed them and built them, the Rosie the Riveters, the people that worked at the oil refineries that produced all of the gasoline, the people that made the ammunition. It was a whole United States effort. And it culminated on what these bombers did. And that's what we're trying to keep alive.
We can't make our future pilots pay to. Besides, they don't have that change. Thank you.
Our biggest mission is to educate the public, and we're so very grateful for all of the children that come out. We think that they need to be taught what happened during those World War II years, and that's one of our biggest goals, is to make sure that everybody knows what that generation did for our country and for us.
For the past 3 days, hundreds of adults and children from the Flint, Michigan area have flocked to the Bishop International Airport to see this famed B-29. Some have come to see a part of history they've only heard about, others to remember. When they leave, they take memories, photographs, and souvenirs. FiFi depends on the kindness of strangers. Proceeds from gate admissions, souvenir sales, and flight deck tours keep her flying.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate your support. Thank you.
But it's time to move on. FiFi and her crew are wrapping up their visit to Flint and preparing for their next stop. Here they've been the only attraction. Tomorrow morning, they'll depart on a short flight to Selfridge Air National Guard Base near Detroit. They are flying into one of the largest air shows in the nation, where they'll compete with dozens of other aircraft for the public's attention and money.
What's the total on the 29? 1, 2...
One of the key positions on the CAF B-29 squadron is that of tour director. This year, FiFi has two. Keith and Judy KIBBE share the job. They started planning the summer's tour in December, while FiFi was undergoing winter maintenance at Confederate Air Force headquarters in Midland, Texas.
And there's a lot of considerations. You don't want to put too many hours on the airplane, so you'd like to have stops that aren't too far apart. You'd like to go to places we haven't been for 4 or 5 years. You'd like to go to some place that will invite you. And once you've gotten through all of that, then there's a tremendous amount of work with getting the hotels and the rental cars and the media lined up, letting the media know that we're coming to town, and getting them out there. A lot of phone calls.
In the Confederate Air Force, the job never really ends. You just move on to the next task.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
On the ground, Judy KIBBE helps keep the tour on schedule as co-director. In the air, she often mans the position of left side scanner. And during business hours, you'll find her alongside Charlotte Davis, another qualified scanner. The two operate the souvenir stand called, appropriately enough, the PX.
This is glamorous, all right. This is the part that's like work.
Now she oversees the loading of PX inventory into Diamond Lil. Lil's the pack horse of the tour. She carries everything the crew needs to do its job.
Carl, I got a favor to ask you. You're nice and tall.
Carl Reese is FiFi's co-pilot, but like everyone else, he lends a hand whenever he's needed.
Can you get him up in there?
Packing,
Goes behind the #1 seat.
loading, securing the planes for the evening.
Why don't you give us a call at the hotel when you get in, and we'll see if we can get a van to come over and get you.
And making sure that when tomorrow morning comes, there'll be enough pilots to move the planes.
Yeah, and you have the days in. You have the number? Okay.
The CAF runs on volunteer help. FiFi requires a minimum flight crew of 6, a pilot, co-pilot, engineer in the cockpit, 2 side scanners, and an auxiliary power unit operator in the rear. Many crew members work full-time jobs and use their vacation time to help out. Others are retired or semi-retired. Pilots often work for the airlines and fly on days off. A major part of KIBBE's job is ensuring that there are enough crew members to fly the airplane from one city to the next.
We are at their mercy. They're all volunteers as well, and sometimes we have trouble getting enough crew in to move the airplanes.
But with new pilots arriving tonight, tomorrow's flight is covered. Early morning, the Gypsies begin final preparations for their flight to Selfridge Air National Guard Base. Before FiFi can take off, there are bags to be loaded onto the plane.
Radio on our Monday morning dog and pony show right now, getting everything thrown in the wagon and get it tied down and get ready to move to the next spot. So that's basically what it amounts to.
A plane to be pre-flighted?
Just gonna bump them through and check for liquid lock on 8 blades.
Okay.
Crew members to be briefed?
We'll do.
You want reports like you
Like we do, like normally do. As long as everything is right, just let it go right.
Okay, it'll be Harold and John and Kenny, right?
And paperwork.
WAINRIGHT?
Lots of paperwork.
And with a parent signature on it also, so why
Okay.
don't you just give that to the young lady here? and
Okay, I'll take that. And if
we'll
you
get on
print
it
your
somehow.
name right here.
Before every flight, anyone flying on a Confederate Air Force plane, including the pilot and crew, must be listed on the passenger manifest and sign a release. Both documents are faxed to the organization's headquarters prior to flight.
These are the two cadets that are
Hi.
going to go with us.
Harold Garner.
Today, 2 Civil Air Patrol cadets will be among FiFi's passengers. The flight is their payment for directing parking lot traffic during her visit. A flight on FiFi is a rare treat that they will remember for a lifetime.
Do we get a copy of that? Sure. All right.
Down to Selfridge is 45, 50 miles, won't take us very long. We plan to be in the air maybe 30 minutes. We're going to lengthen it just a little bit for the benefit of the airplane. Don't expect anything. It should be smooth as silk. Visibility should be to the edge of the earth, it looks like from looking down here. It'll be a gorgeous day to go flying.
A crowd of fans has gathered to see FiFi off and get a unique glimpse of a B-29 in flight.
Force standing by before start. Rotating beacon.
Air on.
Going on. Park and brake.
Set. Mr. Engineer, start the motors, please.
FiFi has made quite an impression on the people of Flint, just as she does with whomever meets her.
You talk to a tower and they say, hey, is this the Super Fortress? Is this the B-29? It's a pleasure to talk to you. You know you're leaving a trail of happy people behind you. It's a satisfying thing.
FiFi, the last flying B-29 Super Fortress, flies to Selfridge, a mere 1,500 feet above the ground. The low altitude allows her crew and passengers to enjoy the scenic Michigan countryside and those on the ground to marvel at the rare sight of a B-29 flying overhead. Now she's a respected and admired war veteran. More than 50 years ago, the Super Fortress was a respected and feared war machine. The B-29 was conceived in anticipation of the United States' entry into World War II. But the idea of a long-range bomber originated in the early 1930s. At that time, the military proposed a plane that could defend the Western Hemisphere from enemy attack.
Today, across the nation, giant aircraft factories are working to build an air fleet second to none.
From initial forays into long-range bombing technology emerged the Boeing B-29 Flying Fortress in 1939 and the consolidated B-24 Liberator in 1941. These two planes later formed the backbone of the Allies' European bombing campaign. Their long-range capabilities far exceeded anything the military had at that time. But as the war with Germany and Japan loomed on the horizon, the Army Air Corps knew they needed more.
I think that you people here are entitled to a little bit of background on this thing that we call air power.
In 1940, they issued a request to manufacturers. They sought proposals for a bomber with a range in excess of 5,000 miles at a speed of 400 miles per hour. That same plane had to carry a 2,000-pound bomb load. Though the concept of strategic bombing had yet to be proven, in theory, this new bomber would allow them to reach deep into an enemy's homeland and destroy his capacity to wage war. Strategic bombing would, they hoped, shorten the war and save lives of the men fighting on the ground. Boeing answered the call with its already developed plans for the B-29. This meant Boeing was well into the design process and virtually eliminated its competition for the program. it also meant the military could expect delivery much sooner than anticipated. When the first Superfortress prototype rolled off the Boeing production line in September 1942, it was unlike anything the world had seen before. It was a monolithic aircraft so large that the Army Air Force refused to call it a heavy bomber and instead tagged it a very heavy bomber.
From the confusion of manpower and equipment within this massive jig will emerge the fabulous 117, a wing of completely new design, which will carry more weight, faster and higher than any other wing.
It was an airplane that's wingspan of 141 feet was longer than the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk.
Each of these nacelles will encase an engine of 2,200 horsepower, 4 of them harnessed to one Superfortress, 8,800 horsepower. Horsepower means more than 300 miles an hour.
It also meant a service ceiling of 36,000 feet and the ability to carry 10,000 pounds of bombs, 5 times the payload that the Army Air Force originally requested.
When these skeleton nose sections are enclosed in aluminum and glass, they will be the most comfortable cockpits a bomber ever had.
The B-29 was the first pressurized military aircraft. Although it routinely operated only a few thousand feet higher than the unpressurized B-24 and B-17, it could fly twice as far as the Liberator and nearly 3 times as far as the Flying Fortress. The Superfortress also had center fire control or remote control guns. Although technologically impressive, the guns lacked some of the accuracy of more conventional defenses. Yet since the B-29 flew out of reach of most fighter opposition, the central fire control proved adequate to meet the task at hand. The B-29 could fly nonstop, the distance equivalent to that from London to Moscow. But the Superfortress would never see action in Europe. In December of 1943, it was decided that the aircraft was needed to bridge the great expanses of the Pacific. The mightiest aircraft of World War II was a tangible result of the American spirit and will to win. The effort to add the B-29 to the American arsenal stretched well beyond the walls of the assembly plants in Washington, Georgia, and Nebraska.
The lumberjack who felled the trees that became the blueprints of the B-29, the bauxite miner in the Arkansas hills, and the miner of iron and coal, the builder of guns and engines and propellers.
Perhaps no one had a more taxing role than the engineers and test pilots who nursed the infant bomber through its growing pains. No new aircraft makes it from drawing board to service without an expected number of problems and revisions. With the B-29, however, the need in the Pacific superseded the need to test. In fact, the process was so accelerated that Boeing already had orders for more than 1,500 of the planes before the first one ever flew. Test flights, usually reserved for prototype models, were actually conducted with operational B-29s as they rolled off the production line. Problems were identified and fixed as the aircraft waited to begin their service. The most stubborn of these problems belonged to the engines. They had a tendency to catch fire. It was a problem well documented before production began. But with no time to develop a new engine, Boeing had to press forward. Modification reduced the number of fires over the years, but the problem plagued air crews throughout its service. Despite production difficulties, Boeing delivered the first Superfortress to the Army Air Force in July of 1943. In the spring of 1944, after a year of crew training and integration, the B-29 was poised and ready to execute its mission against Japan. Over the next 19 months, the B-29 carried out its strategic bombing campaign against Japanese merchant shipping, coke production, aircraft factories, electronic factories. In short, anything that contributed to the Imperial Forces war machine. The B-29 fit a niche. It was the only plane that could reach Japan from land bases. First those in China, then later from those 1,500 miles away in the Marianas Islands. It was the only plane that could carry enough payload such distances to effectively bomb the Japanese homeland. It was the plane that could prove the theory of strategic bombing, and it was the only plane that could carry out the culmination of the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. Atomic bombs delivered from the belly of a B-29 in early August 1945 ended the war in the Pacific. The B-29 had broken Japan's capacity and finally its will to fight. It had fulfilled its destiny. Less than a year later, the first flight of the Convair B-36 made the B-29, if not obsolete, then at least dated. The new plane's 10,000-mile range far outdistanced the B-29's range of 3,200 miles. So it was that after World War II, while a few B-29s went to the newly formed Strategic Air Command, many more were placed in storage. One historic mission did remain, however. On a fall day in 1947, a B-29 flying high above the California desert dropped a small jet manned by Captain Chuck Yeager for the world's first supersonic flight. When the Korean conflict erupted in 1950, B-29s were taken out of mothballs and used as tactical bombers. But they proved to be ineffective in this role. Later in the conflict, they were employed with greater success as strategic bombers. Still, it was clear that their peak usefulness as weapons of war had passed. The last B-29 retired from operational duty as a radar evaluation aircraft in 1960. In their last days, B-29 served as tankers or performed long-range search and rescue, weather reconnaissance, target towing, cargo delivery, and VIP transport missions. The Air Force made some into target drones. It transferred others to the Navy to use as ground targets in the testing and evaluation of weapons systems. It was from the Mojave Desert shooting gallery called China Lake that the Confederate Air Force resurrected a Boeing B-29A in 1971. The 26-year-old Fortress had fallen victim to vandals and 15 years in the desert sun, yet remarkably, it had sustained no damage from Navy weapons. Within 2 months, CAF volunteers had restored it into flying condition and flown it home to their Texas headquarters. It took another 3 years before they completed full restoration, and the B-29, christened FiFi, was ready for her new mission.
Boeing 529 Bravo flights, back William, climbing past 2,000 to 3,500.
FiFi has been on active duty with the Confederate Air Force as a flying museum far longer than she and her contemporaries served with the military. As she completes her short flight to Selfridge Air National Guard Base, her work for the day is done. Her crew, however, still has a full day ahead of them.
Then when we're out here touring, flying is an hour or two. The other 60 hours of the week are selling souvenirs, wiping dirty oil off the airplanes, explaining the airplanes to people.
If they're good enough to fly it, they're good enough to clean oil. And if they're too good to clean oil, they aren't good enough to fly.
There you go.
After each flight, the crew takes time to wipe off the oil FiFi's radial engines have strewn across her surface so that she presents her best face to the public.
Really? I didn't know.
The tour director must coordinate the housing, feeding, and ground transportation needs for the dozen or so people who may be in the crew at any one time and make sure that everyone knows where to be and at what time.
The food stand where you can turn these coupons in to get food is down in that corner down there of the field.
Tomorrow will be a long day. FiFi will fly in the morning and welcome visitors to her flight deck all afternoon. But her crew will start their day hours before she flies and end it hours after they leave her at the airbase.
And there's times we get tired and we might get a little impatient with each other, but a night's sleep and a shower, and everything's okay again. So keeping these airplanes going is a long day.
Before the air show gates open to the public, and 3 hours before FiFi is scheduled to fly, pilots Harold Garner and Carl Reese join other air show pilots for a briefing.
You'll still all taxi and all that together. We'll just put you by yourself so we don't all that spacing. It'll work out fine. Yeah, exactly.
The pilots gather so the air boss can update them on the weather, review emergency procedures, and go over their individual parts of the show.
We'll get you guys down on Bravo taxiway to park you to the north, the C-130s, and then we'll do the other guys from the south.
FiFi, just one of dozens of aircraft flying at Selfridge, will fly at the same time as other bombers and fighters from the World War II era.
Yeah, we're going to separate him out because he flies a little bit larger pattern than you guys do, and we might be able to get you all in for another pass.
While the air crew prepares for flying, other crew members prepare to greet the public.
Oh, we need the 2 blue boxes.
One of the biggest revenue sources for the Confederate Air Force is the PX. But as Charlotte Davis prepares the setup for today's business, it's quickly become apparent there's a problem.
Well, we found out after we got out here that where our airplanes were going to be parked was going to be sterile. We couldn't set up. People weren't going to be able to get inside to get to our tables.
Because FiFi will fly as part of the show this morning, she's cordoned off from the public for safety reasons. If they put the PX in its normal position between planes, the crowd can't reach it. But airshow officials have told them that they cannot set up outside of the roped area. There's only one solution.
They said they had no objection to us putting our table smack right up against those ropes and catching all the people coming in and out. Like right to here. We can stay on one side and they can stay on the other. We need the money to keep the planes flying. We have to be on this side of the rope. They'll be on that side of the rope. We do what we can to keep, to make the sales.
Each year, FiFi flies approximately 100 hours. Each hour she flies costs the Confederate Air Force $5,000.
My corner's up.
That's just for fuel, oil, and wear on the engines.
Everything that we have, everything that we sell, the profit goes to the airplanes.
Side pan.
We depend upon the public and the public donations and are so appreciative of everything.
Although this air show promises a massive crowd, the crew knows from experience that today's intake won't be what it could. The $5 flight deck tours won't be open until the afternoon after FiFi flies, and because the public won't have access to the planes this morning, souvenir sales are likely to be down as well. Additionally, the expansive ramp at Selfridge is congested with vendors selling their wares and other aircraft vying for the crowd's attention. FiFi is just one of many.
Here, I did an early morning flight deck tour. There's some RC flyers.
Sometimes, however, there are pleasant surprises.
Oh, really? And do they need change?
Nope.
That's a donation?
They liked flight deck tour.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Wow.
An early morning flight deck tour nets a $100 donation. FiFi spent her military career training B-29 pilots and crews in the States. Today, her mission is still one of education. Nearly 500,000 people will attend the Selfridge Air Show. FiFi's Confederate Air Force crew hopes to introduce as many of them as possible to her, to tell them her story and the story of the B-29 she represents.
So you're going to see just a small portion of the collection of World War II aircraft warbirds, as they're known as, from the Confederate Air Force and other flying organizations around the country. On the takeoff row, ladies and gentlemen, is the B-29. Midland, Texas, part of the Confederate Air Force, and it's the only one flying, and it's known as FiFi, and it's been in a lot of movies. Paul knows that very well. The pilot is Harold Gardner.
The actual physical part of it, it's a heavy airplane. There's no hydraulically boosted, no boost of any kind. It's all wheels and cables. So you have to really manhandle the airplane. It's not like a modern day boosted controls that you can fly it with 2 fingers at times. This one takes 2 hands.
Air show audiences thrill to the sight of a sky full of warbirds. In stark contrast to the supersonic fighters and bombers of today, the slow rumble of their radial engines takes people on a sentimental journey.
First combat mission against Japan from the Marianas was November 24th, 1944 against Tokyo.
FiFi flies only a few passes down the flight line, but with each one, she delights the crowd.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the right, FiFi, the B-29. That airplane is small by today's standards. Our fighter aircraft today, like the F-15s and some of those, can carry more ordnance than the B-29.
These warbirds take the audience back to another time, when agile fighters like the P-51 protected the lumbering bombers as they fought tyranny in the skies over Germany and Japan.
Ed Shipley with the Mustang is right along giving them an escort as they did in the South Pacific.
There's no denying that flying FiFi is thrilling for both crew and spectators. But as anyone in the B-29 squadron will tell you, it's a minor part of the day's work.
You got 2,000 RPM.
Less than 15 minutes of today will be spent in the air. 15 minutes of a better than 12-hour day. And now that FiFi has introduced herself to the crowd at Selfridge, she'll taxi back for the real work at hand.
There you go, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. You be careful up there.
Every time FiFi flies in an air show, she's performing part of her new mission. It's a public relations mission.
Well, no, these are the 3350s, reverse rights, and 2,200 each.
A mission designed to draw a crowd. The success of that mission will be judged in the next few hours. Judged by the number of people who make their way to this corner of the air show to look and touch, and most importantly, to learn.
Right around 200, yes. Yeah, we bring it way back because we're trying to conserve the aircraft, you know, and preserve it and keep it safe. So we don't fly up anything like it used to.
Stephen Blevins has been part of FiFi's crew for 18 years.
Well, right now I'm collecting money to help keep the aircraft in the air.
Along with the collection, Blevins does what he can to educate.
Yes, these are the movie credits on the side of the airplane here. Okay, I can remember. Yep. So when you watch the movie, look for us.
Okay.
You won't see me because you always see actors. They don't let us get in a picture.
And like the rest of FiFi's crew, Blevins knows the youngest generations
Hi there, little buddy.
are the ones most important to reach.
Wave at this guy. There you go. This is the reason we do this. Yeah, this young man will learn why we're free.
There's two in the back, center, and then there's a tail.
The history lesson won't come from words on a page.
Just like remote control, just like you do your video games now?
It'll come straight from some of the people who lived it.
Yes, sir. That'd be the front gun sight.
Blackie Blackburn flew as a central control gunner on B-29s during World War II. Sitting in FiFi's cockpit, he provides a first-hand account of the aircraft's role in the war.
Your target within that circle, and the computer's taking it.
The B-29 carried Blackburn through the war in the Pacific.
Well, you know, these B-29s took me back and forth 35 times in wartime, and 2 more times dropping supplies or prisoners of war. I've seen some of these airplanes that were literally demolished, fly 2,000 miles back home with combat damage.
Hit immediately after dropping its bombs on Tokyo, this plane flew back on 3 engines.
We had some damage, no control from the co-pilot side. This is all cable. We had half of our tail shot away, and no oxygen and no pressure, no communications whatsoever. We couldn't communicate with each other in the airplane. and they got us back. So that's testimonial.
While the history lessons continue, so does the business of keeping these bombers airborne and airworthy. Judy KIBBE and Charlotte Davis have been able to move the PX between the planes where the traffic flow and income potential is better.
We like to make a little money for gasoline, so we sell items that pertain, mainly we sell items that pertain to either the B-29 or the B-24. We have a few other things, but most of our stuff is pretty specific to these airplanes. What you got? Postcard, okay, thank you very much.
At today's air show, they get a little help attracting business and attention to FiFi, a living piece of history, perhaps as well known as the B-29 itself. General Paul Tibbets stops by for a visit. He is best known for piloting the Enola Gay on its historic flight over Hiroshima. But Tibbets has an even more intimate relationship with the B-29. He was one of the pilots responsible for proving the once troubled plane could accomplish the mission it was designed for. And as a former CAF volunteer, Tibbets also understands this new mission.
I think it's the most important thing in the world because the people ought to know what great technical things that we had to fight that war with. Also, all of the people that flew those airplanes and died, not just the B-29, but all of them flew them and died, or flew them and made it back. They deserve some kind of credit and recognition.
General Tibbets relinquished FiFi's control to younger, more active pilots in the late 1970s, but he remembers the demands of touring with her.
The downside is 110 degrees, 130 degrees on a ramp, tired feet at the end of the day.
The black and the red ones are $10. The blue ones are $8. The sun and the wind, that's the toughest part, just being out on the hot ramps all day long.
Long hours, it's hot, it's all day on concrete, it's tiring.
I thought that was enough. No? Waking up in the morning when my eyes feel like gravel.
Wait a minute, let's start again, shall we?
It's a tough job, but all those guys handling that airplane and going from one town to another as they're doing during the summertime, they're glad to do it because of the things I'm telling you. People, you got some people out there that understand what it is, and they see something that they were associated with during the war, and boy, they flock to that thing like fleas flock to a dog, see?
As difficult as it can be, the job has its rewards. Rewards that come quietly. Rewards that come with the history held inside these aluminum frames.
He was a left seat pilot on one of these airplanes during World War II. And he got in on a lot of the firebombing raids and that, and it tore him up so bad that they basically brought him back in a basket, and he's in a VA hospital for 18 months before they even let him out. And then he was just quiet the rest of his life. He never talked about any of his experiences or anything else. But when we got in town and done the press flight that day, we flew around town and must have went right over his house, and he heard the airplane, and he had to come out and see it. And when they come out, we got him up in the airplane, and he sat down in the left seat up there and just broke loose and told all kinds of stories. His family couldn't believe it. They never heard anything out of him all of his life. But he, snapped him out of his shell like that. For a lot of folks, it's good therapy, because there's some terrible things that some of these guys went through out there to give us the rights and freedoms that we've got today.
With that much history comes a tremendous amount of responsibility.
Since it's the only one in the world that flies, it's priceless and it's very special, and we pamper it and baby it and take really good care of it.
That, too, is a job that never really ends. FiFi's number 3 engine has been spinning oil lately, and the problem persists during her morning performance. While the public gets to know her and the B-29 story, Crew Chief Donald Davis and Kenny Sass are busy trying to track down the problem. Davis has been pampering FiFi for a decade, but his association with B-29s began 50 years ago.
Well, when I first went in the Air Force in August of 1950, this was the first airplane I got on. I was on from 51 through 54. It's a bear to work on yet today. the engineers didn't have time to iron any of the problems out with the airplane. It was just a kind of a hurry-up package to throw it together and fly it and get the war over with as quick as possible.
53 years later, those problems are only confounded by the same rarity that makes FiFi so special.
This being the only B-29 that's flying right now, B-29 store's been closed for a long, long time, and it's hard to come up with a lot of parts sometimes.
The time to catch up comes in the off-season. The bulk of FiFi's maintenance occurs in the winter at CAF headquarters in Midland.
If it wasn't for the work that gets done back there in the hangar in the winter, we wouldn't be out here doing what we're doing through the summer. But this is the only way we can work it. We come out here and earn the money in the summer and go back there in the winter and spend it.
The CAF mission is self-perpetuating. FiFi tours to make money so she can keep touring. The road has its own cycle. The crew sets up in the morning, tears down at night, only to do it all over again the next day. At the end of the day, the air show crowd heads home.
What about these loose pictures?
The day's work is not done for the CAF. In an endless list of tasks, there's still another job to be done.
Blackie!
Back at Blackburn's quarters, the process of bookkeeping begins.
All right, here's a sheet. Okay, give me the gate.
Okay.
Ones?
106.
20s?
54.
50s?
Forward.
It's important to count each income stream, the PX, gate, and tours, separately so that the CAF knows which one generates the most proceeds towards FiFi's mission.
One of those 100s in the PX was a donation this morning.
It's a painstaking process made easier by the use of a checklist, much the way a pilot prepares for flight.
I think we better do another count, another total count.
Still, it takes several counts before the figures balance. The day's long hours begin to wear on the crew. Counting money certainly isn't one of the more glamorous jobs they do for FiFi.
No, but it's probably one of the important ones. And we, of course, in addition to this now, a couple times a week, we have to send some paperwork back to our treasurer in Texas, and we have to wire some money to our home bank. So in addition to doing this after the gates close, well, then during the daylight hours during the week, we have to find time to do some banking chores.
When everything is finally totaled, the day's intake is about what the crew expected.
Actually, it wasn't bad, I guess, for an air show, but it's not good, as good as it would be if we were out at a regular city stop.
Ready?
Gotcha. Let's go.
It takes hundreds of hours of work on the ground just to put FiFi in the air for 1 hour. Even when the long hours take their toll, when the proceeds aren't as much as they would like, the CAF resolutely goes on with its mission for one reason.
It's my personal opinion, and I think a lot of my fellow colonels would agree, that the lifestyle we have today and the world geography and what we're doing today would be entirely different had the United States not got involved in World War II. There were some people out there, Nazi Germany people, the imperialist warlords in Japan, Mussolini's people, who wanted to try to tell as many other people in this world how to live their lives. And then there was the rest of the world that wanted to be free. And that's what World War II was all about. And had the United States not stepped up to the plate, had we not built massive fleets of bombers, it might have gone differently.
This is their message. This is why they take their time and money to support FiFi, to keep her flying, lest people forget.